What's your opinion on the madness of Wall Street bets and Wall Street at the moment?
It's the same kind of phenomena as Gamergate, where you have the vast collection of small people looking up at the giant institution and saying, well, why them and not me? And then when they start making any kind of motions, the giant institution moves to protect its interests, which means breaking the rules and acting arbitrarily, acting in a way that nobody really expected them to act. Like Robinhood ceasing the buying of GME shares. Like that was just done purely to protect Robinhood as a company. It wasn't even to protect Wall Street, because they had this vulnerability, because everything has limits, I suppose. But I think that there's probably shenanigans going on behind the scenes at this point, because I think they've realized, oh my God, this has cost Wall Street in total something like $70 billion. And that's massive, for a bunch of idiots on Reddit who have just spent a few $100 buying a couple of cheapo shares that are not really worth anything anyway. But it's the will that's behind it that's important, isn't it? It's the oppositional will. And I think that essentially I guess I will generally characterize as the elite in any sphere of life, right? It could be politics, which is why we get Donald Trump. It could be Gamergate in video games, which is why Gamergate occurred. It could be in trading and stocks, which is why it's, Wall Street Bets and the game stonks revolt. And I've seen many people in other different walks of life in minor ways finding themselves diametrically opposed to the elite class. And the elite class essentially have to come to the table and admit that they have accrued more than is justifiable in some terms and in some ways. And this is not always money or anything like that. This is what we're talking about really is just the sort of abstract and almost indefinable or unquantifiable concept of power and influence. The little guys feel that they don't have the influence they deserve, and that's probably true. And the big guys feel that the influence that they have accrued is being attacked and being taken from them, which is also true. But the question is there a justified rebalancing that can take place? And I think a consensual conversation about how these things could be made more fair is definitely preferable to the kind of civic war that we're going to see happening between groups of people within the same industries. And so far, this has not been handled well. So far, it has been a kind of social war between the various factions, and they don't end well. It costs everyone lots of money. It's lots of stress. People lose things, and it rarely turns out well. And it just bodes towards it's kind of a downward spiral where these things, if they're not resolved to the general satisfaction, just continue to increase the pressure. So the next time the event is bigger and bigger. And this is why, like, Gamergate, I would say, was probably about 50,000 people at its height, which is actually really small for the video game industry. But when you scaling this up to the Wall Street Bets thing, you can tell that there's a lot of the same people who supported Gamergate and various other sort of populist uprisings like Trump, who also support Wall Street Bets, even though they're not the same people doing it and they're not interested in that sphere of life. But you can see the pressures ramping up, and like the Wall Street Bets thing has been huge. Their subreddit was something like 2.8 million when it started, and now it's over 6 million. So it's like you can see the graph shoot up in the number of people who are interested in this thing and who want to take part in pushing back against what they view, I think rightly, as a kind of ignorant, detached, and self-interested elite class. It's not new. All throughout history, this has happened. It's been a common thing, and this is just the 21st century iteration of this. And so here we are.
But the difference is now that you've got the ability to coordinate so effectively. The proletariat can now gather en masse, and they can do things instantly. And there's, no matter how big the hedge fund is, we've seen here power in numbers on the internet timed correctly with a little bit of manipulation of algorithms and enough understanding of what's going on and a lot of caffeine. Like, you combine those things together and a subreddit. Like, do you think this is the sort of thing that's going to end up with legislation being put in long term? Because this can continue to happen, this level of coordination.
It's not even that it can continue to happen. It's that it's almost impossible to stop.
Correct.
especially when you don't know that it's going to happen. Like the Wall Street Bets thing, I'd never heard of Wall Street Bets until about a week ago.
Oh, dude, I've been following them for around about a year. They are they are phenomenal. They're so good. Yeah. But that being said, I remember looking at it when it had 700K or so on the subreddit, and they were watching people lose their life savings on Apple. Like one person had a legend. If you want to go back and look at the best stuff, YouTube search dankest trades of Wall Street Bets, and they did a quarterly roundup of like the most mad shit. So these guys have been doing it for a very long time. But yeah, the legislation.
Oh yeah, no, I understand they've been doing it for a while and whatnot, but it's just when it becomes injected into the popular consciousness through this kind of event, then it suddenly becomes a much bigger thing. I imagine that they probably will try to create some sort of legislation against this, but the problem is, like, okay, you'll legislate against that thing, but the emotion and the impetus behind it hasn't gone away. It's like, if you've got a hose that you're piping water through at high pressure, and the hose springs a leak and you put your finger down on it. Okay, but the pressure hasn't gone away. You're just artificially preventing that pressure from exhibiting at this point. And so it bursts up again somewhere else. So you got to put another thing down. And until the entire thing will split open because you just got too many points on it that you're holding down. Because the thing that is containing the pressure isn't suitable to contain the pressure, which is why you're getting these problems in the first place. And so what this requires is reform. It's a demand for reform when these things happen, because it shows that there's a problem with the system, and every system that's built by mankind is going to be flawed in some way. And over time, the problems that are created by those flaws build up until they're unacceptable, and the system has to change. This is just the nature of human planning. And it would, I think, be wiser for those people who currently benefit from the system to accept that is an immutable reality of things that men build, and roll with the punches rather than become authoritarian and start clamping down and legislate. Oh, we have to protect ourselves, because then it's not even just that. Hey, this isn't going to work in the long run. It'll work in the short run, but it was not going to work in the long run, and it might end up quite nastily in the long run. But it's not just that. It shows that you aren't really accountable. And it shows that you aren't really interested in a good faith society. And that's the basis of civil society, rather than any kind of like ancient or monarchical or oppressive society. What we have in the West is what we call a civil society, and that's a consensual society into which we all enter and agree on a certain set of rules, so we won't have designs on our neighbors, and our neighbors won't have designs on us, and we'll be able to operate freely and consensually through voluntary interactions and in transactions governed by fair laws, and we can all just get on with our lives. And that sounds really appealing, doesn't it? But as soon as you get an elite class that's like, actually, no, you can't do these things that we can do, we've got rules that you don't have, then it becomes right. So we've got an evil and ill will that underpins this thing, and then it becomes uncomfortable but then people have got designs on what you have because they don't think you have it fairly, because you don't have it fairly. You got it by having a rule for you and a rule for them, and never the twain should meet. And so it creates instability in the system. And when it gets to this point where you've just got an open public revolt that's just essentially burning money to hurt Wall Street, okay, you've gone wrong. You've gone wrong. Something has been messed up. You need to come to the table, get the Wall Street Bets guys to just elect representatives. Tell them, look, elect like 5 people that you guys can trust, and then send them to our headquarters. We'll sit down, we'll live stream the debate, and we'll live stream the negotiation so everyone can see it's totally transparent. And we'll what do you want? What do we want? And we'll try and come to a compromise. And that way people could feel like they won. Both sides could feel like they won something. The Wall Street guys would feel that they're not about, like, they've got armed guards at the Bull outside Wall Street now. It's like, look, if you need armed guards for just, a private institution,
it's not working.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. You're doing something that people hate, and you should stop. But I mean, that's not going to happen. This is utopian.
It would be so good, man. I had Michael Malice on the show this week.
He's good, isn't he?
He's phenomenal. Yeah, and I asked him about Anarchy and kind of how it works and what it means. And fuck me if it doesn't explain a lot. Like, he was talking about when you see the powers that be take the gloves off, that's when you realize actually they don't care about you. They'll give you the semblance of a piece of cheese for every time that you do a little trick, up until the point at which you find a way around the cheese game and you manage to get the whole wheel, and then they'll come in with a hammer and hit you over the head. And as you said just there, it's not a long-term viable strategy. If you decide to scale this over time, trust gets erased. You can, in one event, erase decades of trust with the people or with an industry or with a community or whatever. And yeah, man,
and that's bad. That's where a stable society starts becoming unstable. I mean, I'm not an anarchist, but I can accept that is a legitimate anarchist critique of a state and large scale systems, and it is a legitimate anarchist critique. And so it needs to be spoken about. And one of Michael Malice's strong points, I've only watched a few live streams of like Tim Pool and Joe Rogan and things like this. But one of the things that he's really good at is identifying the will that underpins actions. It took me a while to notice that why his critiques were so incisive, and it's because he's addressing this will that becomes self-evident when you actually look at the actors that are taking actions. You don't do these things from a position of good faith. You just don't do that. And he's really good at identifying that, I think.
That's why I love people that are bothered about the individual. Michael's very, very concerned about personal sovereignty and individual agency and upward mobility and stuff like that. But he has the broader spectrum understanding. So he can see the big picture. He can see that paradigm. But he's concerned with individual motivations. And when you realize that all that big stuff are aggregates of individual stuff, and you can get right to the root of it, you get some really good insights. There's something I've been thinking about. Do you think?
Well, but before we go on to that, I just want to. You're absolutely right there, and I just want to reinforce that by pointing out this is why the communist critiques of capitalism always fail, right? And this is why the modern communist critiques are especially bad, because they always approach it with businesses are purely about making money. And that might be true if you were to abstract the concept of a business into a realm that is not connected to people. And in this abstract realm, you just look at the interests of the institution itself. But then you realize, well, as you say, everything is actually individual action. And so when you look at the individuals involved, you realize they have ethical motivations. They have moral goals. They are not just these like soulless corporate lunatics. And we can see this in Silicon Valley. They've adopted a kind of ideology that gives them license to actually persecute some other kinds of ideological enemies that they've assigned. And so now it's really not about making money. YouTube with the adpocalypse and all of these other problems, like YouTube and the advertisers, if they were just concerned about money, when the Wall Street Journal's like, oh my God, PewDiePie said a naughty word or made a joke about Nazis or something, they'd just shrug and go, so what? So what? Our sales are up. Why do we care? But they didn't. They all reacted and, oh no, that's terrible. Shut things down. And advertisers pull out. And it's like, these are not business interests. YouTube lost 50, 70 billion, something like that. They lost billions of dollars doing this. So if it was just purely about business interests, there's no way that would have been the case. And yet here we are. And you can, see like Susan Wojcicki, and listen to her in interviews. Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, they do have moral interests. And so it is wrong for the leftists to just, separate those and say, right, never the twain meet, because it's not true. It's exactly your point.